The Tesla is a 4-elixir building in Clash Royale. It fires an electric bolt which hits a single ground or air target. It also hides underground when done attacking. This card has had a very interesting history in Clash Royale, and today I'm going to go over that history of the Tesla in Clash Royale. So let's get into it. The Tesla was one of the first 42 cards in Clash Royale's beta on January 6, 2016 and was one of 8 buildings. The Tesla started out as a pretty situational card, but it had a major problem that it had to overcome. It was outclassed by Inferno Tower and Cannon.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine. You just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Inferno Tower was really good as there weren't a lot of tank killers. P.E.K.K.A was really bad, and I guess you could use mini P.E.K.K.A, but he used to be a epic, which was really hard to level up compared to rares. You could also use swarms, but they were countered by Zap, which was OP and had a usage rate as high as 98%, in the top ladder being the highest usage rate ever. Cannon is super cheap, and in a meta where cycle decks are meta, cheap cards are priceless. Because Hog Rider Trifecta and other Hog decks was the first real meta, Cannon was great with and against it. Even 1 elixir makes a huge difference, so Tesla was never really considered for any deck and fell into obscurity. The Tesla may have been bad in 2016, but the same cannot be said about 2017 Tesla. Specifically late 2017. The Tesla was slowly getting buffed more and more in 2016, but it wasn't enough to make it in the meta until one change. I should note that Tesla was also getting some nerfs, but that's because Clash Royale was nerfing all buildings to promote a offensive playstyle anyways. Back to the change. On the Epic Quest update, the Tesla got a rework of a 41% damage increase but a 0.02 second attack time increase. This means it attacked slower but did more damage and more DPS, as well as being able to do more consistent damage and being able to one-shot smaller troops like goblins. I guess now I have to mention the Tesla's partner in crime, the X-Bow. The Tesla and X-Bow have been a combo for a while because they have great synergy. The Tesla is great at defending the X-Bow and letting it connect on the tower. The thing is that the X-Bow needs the Tesla, but Tesla does not need X-Bow, but it does do better when X-Bow is meta. The only thing it struggles with is more spammy metas like Recruits or Log Bait and Graveyard, as it does have good single target DPS but struggles with small guys, with one exception I'll talk about later. The Tesla is now not overshadowed by Inferno and Bomb Tower, but stands with them as the better defensive buildings in 2017. I should also mention Bomb Tower, as it is kinda like a counterpart to the Tesla. Instead of having good single target damage, it has good splash damage and can take out swarms but struggles with tanks. Instead of going underground when not attacking, the Bomb Tower drops a weak bomb when it dies. The Bomb Tower kinda sucked in 2017 because it was nerfed and everyone hated it, so it stayed bad for quite a bit. The Tesla made a great comeback and I love it. The first few months of 2018 the Tesla was the best it's been so far. It was the best defensive building and was used in a ton of different decks. It would usually be in the upper half of cards in terms of usage in top ladder, with the average top 200 usage of about 21 times and appearing in 104 out of the 200 top ladder decks over 5 months. It always appeared right next to X-Bow in terms of usage, which further engraved their synergy. It was used pretty much only in X-Bow but could be used in other decks when it was a more tank-oriented meta like Golem, Giant, Graveyard, etc. It also show up in a few Log Bait and minor poison decks. On the August balance changes, the Tesla got hit with 2 small nerfs. Its lifetime was decreased from 40 to 35 seconds and got a plus 0.1 second attack speed from 1 seconds to 1.1 seconds. This really hurt the card, as not only was it way harder to stack up Tesla in 2 times elixir, but it also had 10% less DPS, which really hurt it against the more tanky cards. The Tesla was pretty good but not OP and was probably nerfed to stop X-Bow, which was pretty good during early 2018. The Tesla was decent but definitely not the best defensive building like it used to be, and was slightly worse than Cannon and much worse than Inferno. On December though, it got a pretty small but appreciated buff. Its first hit attack speed was shortened from 0.7 seconds to 0.5 seconds, which basically meant that it could attack before anything could really hit it because of how it went above and below ground. This made Tesla a tiny bit better and helped it in X-Bow decks going into 2019. 2019 was a pretty boring year for the Tesla. It didn't get any balance changes unless you count a card icon buff, and I guess it got a render in the info screen, but that's about it. It was decent during early 2019 but not amazing because the X-Bow was not doing good in early 2019, so that hurt Tesla. Tesla started a fine in January because it was a freeze meta with lots of balloon and lava hounds, which Tesla does good against. February was a bridge spam meta which Tesla does great into, so that helped it out. March 3M got nerfed and it was a clone meta with lava hound and ram rider bridge spam which Tesla did good against. April was a very beat down heavy meta with golem running around which Tesla doesn't do great into. There was some balloon though which was good, but that gets mitigated by Royal Giant which was used a decent amount. May was just like April with Royal Giant and balloon going crazy, but golem was gone and the Dark Prince buff put bridge spam back which Tesla loves. June keeps the balloon miner meta and the Royal Giant lighting deck was popular for the third month in a row. July brought more golem and lava hound clone, making Tesla happy. After all these boring months of just being fine but never being in the main meta, the Tesla was back with his partner in crime. X-Bow was one of the meta decks because of a P.E.K.K.A buff making it OP. X-Bow Tesla was the best counter and was the third most popular deck. In September the Tesla fell off because P.E.K.K.A got killed and it was the meta where Supercell doubled the Executioner's damage and that was the only defense. October the Elixir Golem released and the Tesla doesn't do freak with the Elixir Golem Witho support and people would rather use the bomb tower. Not to mention that the Witch was OP which made the bomb tower even better and the Tesla even worse. The Executioner was still meta and was not changed, and the two Golems and Knight which followed suit which just helped the bomb tower even more, and the Tesla took a back seat. December had a lot of different cards that Tesla did well against like Graveyard E-Golem and Wall Breakers, and now was just as good as bomb tower. Most of the time in 2019 the Tesla was never that bad but just never was the best building to use in any situation, so it would fall to the wayside. Besides the P.E.K.K.A meta which revived X-Bow, it was never the go-to option but was never a bad option. Let's see how the Tesla does in 2020. The Tesla didn't change a lot from 2019 to 2020. The only change was letting Earthquake hit it when it was underground, which sucked, but the Earthquake wasn't OP until a few years later, so right now it doesn't matter. It was also just like in 2019 where it was always a great defensive option and was probably better than 2019 Tesla. It was a lot of the time just as good as Bomb Tower and Tombstone, which were the other good defensive buildings, with Cannon and Inferno now kinda niche and situational. Inferno is pretty much only used in log bait and weird graveyard decks. Cannon is literally only used in hog and never seen anywhere else, which now is worse because Tesla is used in some hog decks. To be honest, there's not a lot to talk about for Tesla in 2020. The Tesla was slightly worse for like 1 or 2 seasons because Barb and Goblin Hut were OP and Bomb Tower was pretty good, but after the Huts were nerfed the Tesla rised back. The interesting thing was that Tesla now didn't need X-Bow to thrive. It was a healthy card with good use and win rates, even though X-Bow was one of the worst win conditions in the game. The Tesla was now broken from the chains of the X-Bow and used now in lots of decks like certain graveyard log bait and hog decks. It was never in the main decks for these archetypes except for X-Bow of course, but was always a usable option. Let's see how the X-Bow does going into 2021. The Tesla started decent in early 2021 but got better over time, and by the time it reached June it needed a small nerf, and that's what it got. Its lifetime got decreased to 30 seconds from 35 seconds. The interesting thing is that the Bomb Tower also got a buff from 25 seconds to 30 seconds, so now they're even more like a counterpart to each other, and it definitely put Tesla back to a B or a tier card. Then the Tesla exploded into a high A or a plus tier. The super popular meta decks of this month get destroyed by Tesla, and it's like the only building being used and replaces ever other building. The thing about Tesla is it's so versatile as a building because it can counter low health range cards like Firecracker and Dart Goblin. It can go through tanks and mini tanks and can deal with huge pushes if it has a support for the enemy supporting cards. When Tesla is meta no other building is, so that's why in December it got nerfed again. It got a attack time interval increased to 1.2 seconds from 1.1 seconds. A 0.1 second attack time interval, and it's a decent nerf, putting Tesla back to B tier where it honestly belongs. Let's see how it does in 2022. The Tesla is just like how it was last year, but this year it got no new balance changes. The Tesla started off as an average card in January, about as good as every other building but worse than the Goblin Cage. February was pretty cool because Earthquake was OP, yet Tesla and Bomb Tower were decent. March, the Tesla was good A tier. Tombstone, Cannon Cart and Mortar were the best buildings, so it got a tiny bit outclassed. April, Tesla was again B tier, the same buildings were good and is slightly better than Bomb Tower. We have to skip May because I can't find a May 2022 tier list. June, Tesla is B tier because Cannon and Cannon Cart are better and it's on par with Inferno. Again, we have to skip June and July because I can't find a tier list, so next is August. August, Tesla was C tier for the first time in a while because it's a more tanky meta and Inferno outclasses it. Skipping September to the next balance changes in October. October, again Tesla was C tier, which sucks because other buildings are better except for Cannon. There was no tier list for November, but I think Tesla would have been just fine because of the Phoenix and Monk steam rolled the game. December, Tesla sucked. It was D tier and the only worse building was the Furnace. Poor Tesla. The whole time Tesla would hover at B or a tier because it was balanced, but it didn't get changed and kinda got power crept closer to the end of the year as other buildings were getting buffed. Let's see how he does in 2023. 2023 was a okay year for the Tesla. The Expo was pretty alright in 2023. It was pretty bad though for the first half of the year, being between D or B tier. It then finally got a much needed buff in August. It got a 0.1 attack interval increase from 1.2 to 1.1 seconds between attacks. Now let's get into how it did throughout the year. February were the first balance changes of the year. It was D tier even though Expo was good and some Expo decks even used Cannon instead. Again, Tesla sucked in April, still being D tier and getting subbed out more and more in decks it used to be good in. June was the worst Tesla has ever been and it was F tier. It's now as bad as Furnace and isn't even used in Expo that much. The Tesla is so bad, and so thank God its buff came in the next balance changes. August was the first season tier list I could find with evolutions, and the Tesla worked fine with it, and thanks to the buff it got back to B tier. Tesla was back to C tier in September, partly because the Evolved Knight does well into Expo and Tesla. Also, balance changes now come every month, which means no more crying emotes. The Tesla was B tier again in October and was just fine, but slightly worse than Bomb Tower. November was literally just the same spiel as October. December, Tesla is C tier. It was fine, just not the best, and outclassed by Bomb Tower and Cannon. This year was pretty meh for Tesla because the first half of the year sucked, but the second half was a lot better for it, making it balanced again. 2024 is the last and coolest year, so let's get into that. 2024 has been some ups and downs for the Tesla. It was never incredible and sometimes bad, but it got an evolution. You need to play Tesla twice before getting the evolution. It gets 20% more HP. When it pops out of the ground, it creates an electric pulse that goes 6 tiles around it that stuns enemies and kills Swarm. It also got a buff to the evolution in May so that when it dies it makes one of it electric pulses. Let's get into how it's done so far in the year. January, Tesla was an average building at C tier and was used in a lot of minor control. I couldn't find a tier list in February, which is weird because there was balance changes, but I digress. March, Tesla was actually a tier and was used in lots of decks, and the only defensive building better was Bomb Tower. April was great for Tesla. It was used in a ton of different decks like Expo, minor control and so on, but the evolution was also really good as it can just rip through pushes. It also does great against the OP evolved battle ram. The thing is that the Evo Tesla kinda fell off as new OP evolutions came out, and it was now like a D tier evolution. Now that it has its new buff, let's see how it will do. The Tesla has had a very interesting 8-year history of many ups and downs and many decks and synergies it has been in. Now that it got its new buff this season, let's see how it does. So until next time.